Thank you all so much for sitting in and viewing this webinar. I'm Jonathan Hill, the Executive Director of Keep Charlotte Beautiful, joined today by a couple of experts in the field of pollinator gardens and native habitats here locally. This presentation is to give folks just an introduction, sort of a 101 to the idea of pollinator and native habitats, specifically looking at what they are and what to look for. Firstly, we're going to hear from Don Boekelheide. He is an instructor for Landscape for Life, specifically working through the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens. And he's going to provide an overview of kind of what native and pollinator habitats are, how they came to be, and what that movement looks like. So take it away, Don.
Jonathan, thank you very much. And it's an honor to be here with you and with Donna and Laura. And I want to thank everybody for taking this training. I hope it opens some real, some thought about how people are approaching their yards now. You may know me from my work with composting. I started the Master Composter program here in Charlotte back in the 1990s. Back then, public agencies like Waste Management were already telling people to scale back their lawns for economic reasons and for environmental reasons. It's a lot of waste. Now today, even more families are changing their landscapes to make them more natural. And I know that makes the job of an inspector more difficult. Lawns are easy to judge. Either they're going to be mowed or they're not. The trouble is that lawns aren't a natural part of our landscape here in Charlotte. And it takes a lot of energy and money and effort to keep them up. So that alone makes it no surprise that people are turning to natural landscaping. However, there's a lot of good news here because natural yards are normal. Beyond the lawn, there's always a little bit of forest, isn't there? We love native dogwoods. We love our oaks. You'll find them in just about everybody's yard. And we can have beautiful natural landscapes at the same time. So that's what people are looking for. So I guess you could say that natural landscaping is based on our natural heritage here in North Carolina. It begins with plants that grow naturally here. People call them native plants. And simplifying a bit, these grow together in natural communities. There are forests and prairies. Along waterways, there's special plants. And since the coming of the First Nations people 10,000 years ago plus, there have been food growing areas. Now, these may change over time, but they're stable and resilient ecosystems, and they exist without mowing or pesticides or deafening leaf blowers. Unfortunately, lawns aren't one of those natural landscapes. Our turf grasses came from Europe or Africa, and to get them to grow, you have to fight nature. It's like building on a floodplain. Eventually, you're going to lose. Now, since we have beautiful natural landscapes, people are taking advantage of this. They're changing the way that they garden, changing the way that they manage their yards. It's not just a negative movement for most people and just get rid of the lawn. You know, that's not what's going on. It's a celebration of our natural heritage. Plus being a way that's a lot better for our planet, a way to garden that's a lot better for our planet and a lot better for families. Now, once you go to this more natural type of landscape, you'll see songbirds and butterflies that are coming in attracted by our native plants. And it's healthier for your family because you're avoiding pesticides. You're avoiding the pollution of lawn machinery, and you can save a lot of money. This isn't just something that's limited to North Carolina. It's spread all across the United States and across the world. One example you may have heard of is up there in the upper left, xeriscaping. Xeriscaping is designing a yard so that it needs minimal watering. That's not a big problem here, but out west, where drought is a reality, and sometimes we have droughts here, these are plants that can survive without extra water. That's made lawns out in California and other places an endangered species. Another thing, something to consider here in Charlotte, is no Mow May. Now that's where people let their lawns grow on purpose without mowing in the springtime. In different municipalities, they suspend the 12-inch rule through the end of May. What that does is it provides habitat and food for beneficial insects and for birds. It makes a huge difference. And that persists on through the summer and the fall, meaning those beneficials are working hard to control pests. If you look down there on the right, you see a bunch of people walking through New York City in the midst of a native plant landscape. It's along an old subway above ground line called the High Line, and it's become a tourist attraction. And it's filled with plants that would be growing there if there wasn't a city. It's right in the middle of a heavily urban area. So if they can do it in New York City, we can do it here. Last but not least, the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Houston has teamed up with the United States Botanical Garden, and they've created a training program for homeowners. It teaches how to make your yard more sustainable, more environmentally friendly. It uses a lot of these techniques, including native plants. And you can take this class at UNC Charlotte. Now, speaking of our home landscape, it's not just the Landscape for Life class. There's other things going on in Charlotte and in North Carolina that are really worth knowing about. Camp North End is a major development. You can see up there in the upper left, you can see the city skyline of Charlotte, and look to the right of the walk. It's all native plants. They've done major landscaping and utilized native bunch grasses that don't need to be mowed and create habitat and change throughout the year and create beauty. Right next door on the top is Debbie Roos. I think she's the best extension agent in the entire state. She's an extension agent for sustainability, meaning she works a lot with farmers in Chatham County, in the town of Pittsburgh. But she got interested in pollinator gardens and has become a renowned expert and has done pollinator gardens that uses native plants. A pollinator garden is something that utilizes native plants and other well-adapted plants to attract pollinators throughout the year. Anyway, she's become an expert at this and has created pollinator gardens at the governor's mansion for both Republicans and Democrats. She's got a wealth of resources. You can go see how to do it over in Pittsburgh. She gives tours. There's the local Wildlife Federation, and Donna and Laura are part of that wonderful organization. They'll help you with advice and suggestions. And in addition, the National Wildlife Federation will certify your yard if you follow the steps for making it more sustainable. So some folks, including myself, have done this. One way you can tell that a yard is purposely sustainable is that they've got a sign there that it's a certified wildlife habitat. Unfortunately, lawns are like a desert. We'll talk more about that later. So a certified wildlife habitat yard is going to have much more diversity in it. Last but not least, you can see how these different plant choices, gardening choices, landscaping choices look by visiting the North Carolina Botanic Garden. Look down there at the lower left. This wonderful layer upon layer of different plants at different heights, different flowering times. You can also see that at UNC Charlotte, at Winghaven, at Daniel Stowe, right here close to home. And they have how-to displays as well. So it spawned entrepreneurialism. There are now a number of firms here in Charlotte that you can hire to manage and maintain and install a natural landscape. So, Shameless Commerce Division, you can take the 6-week class, and I hope you do, at UNC Charlotte. It's been offered for the past 3 years, and it's changed. Anybody can go online to the Landscape for Life site and look at the materials and become a trainer. What we've done at UNC Charlotte is we've adapted it to local ecology. So you're right. It isn't overly complicated. It's no more complicated than other kinds of gardening, but it does take some know-how, and it certainly isn't mow, blow, and go. It's a different way of approaching your soil and your landscape. So I have a basic question for you. You look at this picture. This is a slide straight from Landscape for Life. And they're always asking the question, is it unsustainable or sustainable? On the left there, you may see what looks like an unobjectionable lawn. It's not over 12 inches high. There are little shrubs. On the right-hand side, though, you see more of a natural landscape. The diversity of flowering plants, the different layers, the choice of plants that are native to the area. So both are landscapes, and I am going to say, for you as inspectors, both are acceptable. Both show real care and involvement by the gardener. Personally, I much prefer the one on the right, because the one on the left that we're so used to, it isn't sustainable. My background's in agriculture. We talked a lot about sustainability on the farm. That means choosing methods that allow your farm to keep going over time and not be wiped out and become something like the Dust Bowl. It's crop rotation. It's good soil management, those kinds of things. But it's keeping the farm in business. Now, in a home, you don't have anybody that is going to charge you money if your landscape isn't sustainable or something. But lawns are really energy intensive. They take huge amounts of fertilizer, chemicals, time, effort, and they disappear. They disappear if we didn't put that effort into them. So a lot of people are thinking, myself included, how can we work with nature? Why do I have to do this constant battling? That doesn't sound like fun for gardening. What we want to do is build on our natural landscape, the wealth of native plants and the benefits of our local ecology, and celebrate the beauty of those things. And a lot of people are changing their yards to do just that.
Thank you, Don. Up next, we'll move on to Donna Bolls. She's the president of the Charlotte Wildlife Stewards, which is a chapter of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. And she's going to be talking more about the benefits of pollinator native habitats, and then get a little bit more into what those look like versus native or versus your standard yard. So take it away, Donna.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm really happy to be here to talk with you all about this important issue. So is your yard, is what you're looking at, when you're out, in the community, or maybe you've had a call about somebody's yard, is it an overgrown yard or is it a wildlife meadow? How are you going to tell the difference? And why should you even care? So there are a lot of benefits to having a native plant meadow, and that can be either, some people it might be their entire yard. Other people it might be more of a contained area. If it's in a contained area, you're going to recognize that a little bit better than if it's, the majority of the yard. But there are benefits to having a yard that's like that. So as Don mentioned, there's going to be a reduction of maintenance and costs. So you're not going to need fertilizers and pesticides, and that includes organic or manufactured fertilizer and pesticides. You won't even need those. You're not going to need water, or you'll just need a little bit of it once your plants get established. Now, when you have new plantings, they're going to take some care, but in a year or two, once they're established, they take care of themselves in a lot of ways. The other thing is that you don't need to necessarily have, put in a ton of these plants, because they will reseed themselves and they'll spread out to fill the spaces, and they'll crowd out weeds. So you have, basically you've mulched with your plants. You don't need to go out and buy mulch for those areas. It conserves, native plantings and meadows conserve water and the soil. The roots help keep the soil in place. They hold on to the water. So, when we do have periods where there's not much rainfall, there's water that's stored in the soil. The other thing it does is it prevents stormwater runoff. So instead of, we have a heavy rain and the water's just, running down a hill, washing across a lawn of cut grass, this will capture a lot of that water and just hold it right there on that property. The other thing about a native plant meadow is that they're beautiful. In the spring and the summer especially, they're going to be blooming. They're going to have lots of colors. It's going to attract a lot of wildlife, a lot of butterflies. People keep saying, well, I don't see butterflies anymore. Well, that's because they don't have plants to eat. But more importantly, it's not the butterflies, because they'll take nectar from anything. It's caterpillars. The caterpillars can be very specific about what they eat. So if oak trees our native oaks will support over 500 species of caterpillars. So you're going to get a lot more butterflies from that, as opposed to a crepe myrtle might only support 5 species of butterflies. So that's something to think about. Grass doesn't support any butterflies or bees or any other nectar-eating creatures. If you like hummingbirds, then it would be great to have some of the plants that they like to eat. The other thing, in North Carolina, we have a fairly mild climate, and so we can have bloom times that go actually all year long. But so far as the flowering plants go that you might see in a meadow, you're going to have some that bloom early spring, all through the summer, and even into the fall, into the late fall. Some asters will bloom into November and December. And then during the non-growing time, you're going to have they're going to be brown. You're going to have stems and stalks, but there's even beauty in that you see the structure of the plants. The other thing is, with the seed heads, the birds are going to be eating those seeds all through the winter, and the stems that are left standing can be shelter for small animals, for butterflies. The native bees will burrow into the stems and overwinter in those areas. And the other thing is that some of our native shrubs, some of our native grasses, whatever, their colors will change seasonally, and so that gives interest to the garden also. The native plants, they protect the environment, because as we've said, you're not going to have chemical pollution. Think of those chemicals going into the storm drains and running into our creeks. And there's a lot of wildlife in our creeks, from macro invertebrates to amphibians and fish, that this pollution is very harmful to them. By not mowing and blowing, you're reducing the carbon emissions in the environment. And that's a really important aspect of having native gardens. And not only with the carbon pollution, but you're going to reduce the noise pollution from these machines. And the plant sequesters the carbon in the plant matter. So as these things are growing, I mean, that's what they are. Living things are made of carbon, so that's going to hold in that carbon and not release it out into the atmosphere. And maybe even most importantly is that these plants are producing oxygen. They take up the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and through photosynthesis and the other processes in the plant materials, it releases oxygen into our atmosphere, which is absolutely important. And last but not least, these meadows provide habitat for wildlife. So I've already mentioned that the caterpillars depend on these plants for a food source. And if you want butterflies, you need caterpillars. It also provides shelter from weather and predators. It gives them some place to hide under the leaf matter. If when you've left the fallen leaves, that provides a lot of shelter for small animals. It also increases the biodiversity of your plants and animals. A lawn is basically a monoculture of fescue or Bermuda or some of the other species of plants that aren't native here, as Don mentioned. And it's just one whole blanket of the same thing. When you have different plants out there, they will serve different wildlife. And it's also healthier because you have a wide variety. So if something gets sick and dies, not everything gets sick and dies. And, you're going to have more, like I said, just more variety of the plants and animals. And that just makes it a lot more fun. Okay. So what's wrong with this picture? We've already talked about that, haven't we? It is a monoculture. So it kind of looks neat, but that's probably the main benefit. It's not serving any ecological benefit. It's time consuming. Think of how long it would take to cut that grass. Now, I'm not saying that some grass isn't needed. You might have pets, you might have children, you want an area for them to play, and that's fine. But, do you want pesticides and herbicides on that your children and your pets are running around on and rolling around in? This is an expensive lawn to maintain. So, as Doug Tallamy, I hope you will read some of his books where he talks about a lot of this, but he says that, lawn is ecologically a dead space. There's really nothing there to attract life. So this is a really old slide, but I think it's very important because it shows the development of Mecklenburg County, of which Charlotte, is a large part of the county. The one on the left, in the purple area is what has been developed. That's the urban area, and you can see all the how much is forested, which are really probably more of our outlying towns. But the one on the map on the right shows, you can even see in the purple area how there was still green in that purple area. And here in 2011, which was 11 years ago, how much that green within the purple has decreased, and then how much the development has spread out. And you can imagine now that it probably takes up this entire map of the purple area. In 2011, it was 68% of the county. So, what's happening with this is that we've had dramatic habitat loss, and I'm sure that's not a new thing to anybody. But there's been a lot of infill in Charlotte, so areas where there were, maybe 3 to 5, 10 acres of land that was forested or wooded. Those, people think, well, it's not being used. Well, it is being used. There's a lot of life in that area. But when you go in, and it's not just the trees that we're losing, but we're losing the undergrowth, which is shelter and food and habitat, places where animals are raising their families. All of that is gone, and we're losing it more and more. People are building large houses or apartment complexes that take up the entire lot, so there's less green space on those lots. And if we can replace that with native plants rather than grass, then at least we have little pockets. And what we need to do is build on that. And like 98% of property in the United States is privately owned. So if we can get the private landowners to be putting in pollinator gardens and more native landscaping, then we're gonna, we can create corridors for the wildlife. It's no secret that people have possums and deer and raccoons and squirrels in their yards. It's because they don't have other places to live. And the other thing is, if we don't have this native landscaping, these native plants, we're not going to have food for the pollinators, for the adult pollinators or the caterpillars and other young forms of it. We're not going to have those. We're not going to have birds. And I know that people around here love our birds. We're not going to have places for them to find shelter or raise their young. And we're going to have chemical runoff, as we've already talked about. Go ahead. So in helping you try to determine, what's the difference between an overgrown yard and a wildlife meadow, there are a few things that you can look for. If it's overgrown grass, it's probably going to be more uniform in color and in the height, because it's all the same plant. So it's, you're not going to see a lot of different things. There may be some weeds, weedy things in with it, but it's not really going to look, everything's going to look pretty much the same. And you're not going to see flowering plants, and you're not going to see, plants with, maybe if it's brown, the plants, you're going to see seed heads and leaves left on the plant stems. But if it's a wildlife meadow, even if it's not in a contained area, it might be the majority of the yard. What you're going to see is you're going to see different colors, not just blooming flowers, but the leaves are going to look different. There may be different colors in those. The stems are going to be different. You're going to see different heights because there's a variety of plant life in there. And the forms of the flowers is, some of them are clumping, some of them are spreading, but you're going to see different plants. And that's going to indicate that these are most likely native plants.
Thank you, Donna. Last but certainly not least, we'll turn to Laura Domingo. She's not only a naturalist at Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation, but she's also the co-chair of the Piedmont chapter of the North Carolina Native Plant Society. And she'll be going into some additional detail about some of the plants species that you might want to look out for when it comes to native habitat and pollinator gardens.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Don and Donna. I think you guys did a great job of sharing a lot of the what and why, and hopefully encourage our audience to embrace this rather new way of thinking for some of us. So my role in this presentation is to introduce you to native plants. When working with folks in creating pollinator habitats and backyard habitats, we do try to encourage native plants, or at least for them to be considered. So what is a native plant? There are some examples here in the pictures, and they are basically considered native if they originated and were established in our geographic region before the colonization of the Americas. Next slide. So I was tasked with sharing information about native plant species and kind of things you might encounter and tips for distinguishing species that are native from those that aren't, which is, I will say, quite a task and likely not to be accomplished in just a small presentation. And what I've done is chosen a few pictures of from different sections, grasses, wildflowers, vines to go over. And these are likely to be more available in our nurseries, in our stores locally, that so you might be able to run into them more often. So, and finally, at the end of this, I'll give you some resources for maybe differentiating some of the native species. So common little blue stem, switchgrass, these are a couple of the grasses that you can easily find. They're typically going to grow more in clumps. Understanding that our native habitats are going to look different at different times of the years. Sometimes they'll be a little bit messy, but they will typically grow in clumps. A lot of people that do native habitats work a lot with sedges, which are can be thought of as kind of a smaller grass, and they are important, and with some of our pollinators as host plants. but they'll also be in little clumps like the one on the right. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So wildflowers are incredibly versatile. They're going to be different colors, different shapes, different sizes. And it would take an intensive training to go through how to differentiate each of them from their perhaps non-natives. But I think with all pollinator gardens, kind of regardless of what people are using, there's a purposeful planting. Typically we'll plant in borders with signs. And again, I've just chosen a few here that I know I can walk into some of the nurseries locally that do sell natives and find some of these Rudbeckia, common milkweed, and mountain mint. Go ahead to the next one. Same thing with vines and ground covers. Ground covers. So these are going to be a little bit more sparse than maybe our non-native ground covers. So eastern blue-eye grass, some consider a wildflower, but it does kind of spread out as a little bit of a ground cover. Green and gold, and then our wild strawberry, which grows naturally in most yards, but plays an important role. And vines, mostly when we're planting these, if it's a purposeful pollinator planting, we'll have this on some kind of a trellis or something to grow on. It's not typically like your English ivy growing on the side of the house. And again, will be a variety of colors, sizes, and shapes. So what does a native habitat look like? Again, it's as varied as there are people that plant native habitats, but you will likely have borders. You hopefully will have signs, and we're encouraging people to put signs, so that would make it easier for you. You'll have a diversity of colors, sizes, and I think the main thing is that they'll look different times of the year. They'll have that variation. There'll be a purposeful planting, usually in groups, and just have that variety all around. And so there are many resources that we have. I only included 3 that are more local to us. iNaturalist actually is a national free phone app, but you can choose to have it identify locally, and you literally just hold it up your phone, take a picture, and it will let you know what you have, give you a good idea of what you have. You can also upload it, and then people will give you feedback on that, but it'll let you know if it's native or not. The North Carolina Wildlife website, we have a whole list of resource pages, as well as catalogs of photos you can look at. The Native Plants of the Southeast is as it says, very comprehensive guide to some of the more common species that are planted. And then, of course, as was mentioned before, Landscape for Life is a great website resource. The North Carolina Wildlife Federation has resources. So I encourage you to, get out, use these, and educate yourself. And thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our experts today. If you have any additional questions for any of our panelists, you can get their contact information through me. I've provided it down there below. Thank you again for listening in on this presentation, and look forward to hearing more. Hope you all have a better idea about pollinator gardens, what they are, why they are, and what to look for.